production of what we now know as the first stone tool. We call it the Lamecway tool. It was just west of Lake Turkana. This was found. We've not only found the tool, but we found the butchered remains of scavenged animals. So we find the tool, and we know for sure they're hacking on bones. Again, they're not hunting, right? They're scavenging the kills that were made by predators. And I think for everybody listening, and I'm sure they might already know this, but we understand predatory behavior on the African savanna by watching modern correlates of the ancestors. So the animals that were running around 3.5 million years ago on the savanna were not lions, and they were the ancestors to the modern day lions, just like they're our ancestors as well. So their ancestors, who were some nasty, crazy predators, were out there taking down animals, jumping on them, using their huge canines to rip these carcasses apart, dive into the inside and access the most bioavailable nutrient-dense parts, the blood, the fat, and the organs. And when they leave these carcasses on the savanna, these animals that are biologically equipped to go in and scavenge, things like the ancestors to modern-day hyenas and buzzards, will go in, rip off flesh, and do their thing. The problem was our ancestors were not biologically equipped to join that party. They could watch it as they're munching on some termites, but they couldn't go do it themselves. When they created the stone tool, it provided them access. They were no longer limited to their own physical limitations. They could go out there and hack off huge hunks of meat, bring them back to the elderly, the young, the sick, eat it themselves in safety somewhere else. But what I think is a real big takeaway from this is that when they start introducing meat into their diet, we don't see huge biological changes. We see a little bit. There's a little bit of body size growth, a little bit of brain size growth, but we don't see these massive changes. The massive changes happen when our ancestors start hunting and also control fire. And the difference between scavenging and hunting is the hunters have first access to the most nutrient-dense parts of the animal. And that happens in 2 million years. Yeah.
And let's emphasize that's the blood, the organs, and the fat, right? So that's
period. Meat has been in our diet for 3.5 million years. The entire animal has been in our diet for 2 million years. And we see the biggest growth in body and brain size when we start introducing animals into our diets. Responses to vegan interpretations of the importance of vegetables in the past. Number one, sometimes I hear things like, well, we've been eating vegetables for 5 million years, actually before that, millions and millions and millions of years. Yeah, but they were small, their brains were small, and they had a high level of what we call sexual dimorphism, right? The males were a lot larger than the females, and we think that's the case because the increased nutritional need of females when they're doing, from an evolutionary perspective, the most important thing that female members of a species can be doing is carrying a baby to full term, giving birth to a healthy baby, and nursing that baby until they can take care of it. I mean, that has to happen or else the species dies out. And there's massive increases in nutritional needs during those periods of a woman's life. So if the thinking is if they start out with lower nutritional requirements in an environment where they maybe can't get all the food that when those nutritional requirements skyrocket, they can handle that. But what we see when you start introducing animals into the diet and these incredibly nutrient-dense, bioavailable foods that our bodies don't have to work that hard to get access to the nutrients in, that we start seeing a reduction in sexual dimorphism to the point where human females, yes, on average, are smaller than human males, but nothing like they were in the past. Plants contain toxins, right? And all plants do, even our domesticated ones from the grocery store. The ones that are out in the wild, not only are the toxins more prevalent, but often they can do some nasty damage. So it's not like they're looking, the world is their oyster and they can go out like they're in the produce section of the grocery store. They are limited. If they don't have a technology to detoxify plants, by default hyper-seasonal, by default hyper-local, and their selection is incredibly limited because there's not that many plants that are safe enough to consume throughout, And then the other point is that the insects were the most important part of that diet. And there's been a lot of studies done with chimpanzees looking at the importance of insects. And again, one of the things we see is when chimpanzees are lactating, which is the highest nutritional need in a female's life when she's lactating, even more so than pregnancy, they go directly to insects, and their insect consumption skyrockets. Finally, our ability to support that brain growth with the right nutrition that allowed it to happen and supported that brain growth. The control of fire, and I mean control of fire, I mean the ability to start it, put it out, control the temperature, control the light, control the heat. The ability to do all of those things with fire was somewhere around 2 million years ago. We've domesticated ourselves. We can no longer survive outside of a culture-created environment. If we got rid of all our technology, and I say this all the time, I don't care if you're Bear Grylls, I don't care if you know the behavior patterns of all sorts of animals around the world, and all the poisonous and not poisonous plants and all that. If we stuck you in the middle of the woods naked, well, in most parts of the world, you die of exposure, but you couldn't feed yourself. It's impossible to do. So I say that because in my mind, the ancestral diet is one that is created through technology. Stone tools, and then hunting, and then fire, and fermentation, and all sorts of other sorts of things. And we've built our bodies on diets that were reliant upon these technologies to introduce foods we have no business eating, we biologically have no business eating, but we now require because our bodies are built on the backs of these. I say it all the time, we're omnivores not by design, we're omnivores through technology. So to go back to your original question, how do we deal with plants? The only way we've been able to deal with plants as long as we have is because, and we see this through time, and it's a focus of a lot of my research, we've figured out ways of taking plants and doing our best to make them as bioavailable as possible, make them as nutrient dense as possible, and make them as safe as possible. The thing with animals is that once you've taken an animal down and cut it open, that's all really the technology needs to do. I mean, there's some evidence that cooking meat a little bit helps make it a little more bioavailable. It's sure that especially with red meat, if we chop it up or grind it or slice it real thin, it's a little bit easier for our bodies to access the nutrients in meat and not have to work so hard. But the blood, the fat, and the organs, heck, in most cases, they're easier for our bodies to access the nutrients without the cooking than with the cooking. So the technology for animals, to me, is really about harvesting that animal and getting it cut open. And then for the rest of it, our bodies can do the work. But for plants, harvesting that plant is where the real work begins, because those plants, contrary to many people's thinking, plants are not put on this earth to feed us. Like, plants are put on this earth to do what they need to do. They need to survive and protect themselves, and they do it through chemical warfare. So they do it because they can't move. So they have all these toxins. So if you look at the technologies that our ancestors developed through time, and we continue to have to rely upon,